Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight, and it's Friday, March 20th, 2015. Now, in response to an op-ed piece that appeared in the Washington Post this last Sunday, we have an article up on Infowars.com from Consortium News. A neocon admits the plan to bomb Iran. Yes, Joshua Moravchik wrote on the Washington Post, he said, the title initially on the print version was, "War is the only way to stop Iran." They toned that down a little bit on the online version. They said, "War with Iran is probably our best option." But this is what he said. He agrees with Netanyahu's hysterical view of Iran, but he recognizes that killing international negotiations on limiting Iran's nuclear program would leave only one realistic option. He said in the op-ed piece on the Washington Post, "What if force is the only way to block Iran from gaining nuclear weapons? That, in fact, is probably the reality." Then he goes on to say, does this mean that our only option is war? He says, yes. Then he goes on to say, but we can strike as often as necessary. You know, we have struck Iran quite a bit. The American public doesn't really realize that. Our memory of Iran really extends back to the takeover of the U.S. Embassy. We don't really remember that our government overthrew their democratically elected government. Our CIA did it. And then our CIA trained the Savak. After they put in the Shah, they used the Savak to torture any opposition to the Shah. That's the kind of government that we gave Iran, that they suffered under for decades before they overthrew that government and then occupied the American embassy. We only remember their occupation of the American embassy. We also don't remember that the U.S. military accidentally, likely, shot down an Iranian commercial jet plane. Now, if that had happened the other way around, we would have never accepted the explanation that that was done accidentally. We have looked for every kind of provocation we can find in order to get at Iran's oil, to control it. We have established dictators, we've established a ruthless terrorist regime, and looks like we're going to try to do that again. They go on to point out that Iran doesn't have a history of attacking its neighbors either. They were involved in the Iran-Iraq war, but Iraq was goaded on by our ally, Saudi Arabia, as well as the United States, to attack Iran. They go on to say, not only did Netanyahu wildly exaggerate the danger from Iran, but he ignored the fact that Iran's involvement in Iraq and Syria has come at the invitation of those governments to help fight the terrorists of al-Qaeda's Nusra Front and the Islamic State. Now, that ties into our next article where David Petraeus says that Iran is a greater threat than ISIS or ISIL, whichever you want to call it. It's Iran that's the threat. It's our allies, Saudi Arabia, it's our allies, ISIS, the ones that we trained, that are beheading people left and right. But David Petraeus says that the Islamic State is not the biggest threat that the U.S. faces in Iraq. He says the foremost threat to Iraq's long-term stability and the broader regional equilibrium is not the Islamic State, rather it's the Shiite militias, many backed by, some guided by Iran. Well, because the United States backs ISIS and guides ISIS. That's where we got this in Syria. That's where they came out of. And then they go on to point out in the Politico article his credentials. They said the White House confirmed Monday that the administration is consulting Petraeus for advice on how to deal with the threats posed by ISIL, despite his recent admission that he shared classified information with his mistress. Now, when this happened with Snowden, of course, there were calls for him to be arrested, calls by Fox News commentators for him to be assassinated. No such calls for David Petraeus when he violates the law, when he shares classified information. No, he gets becomes a presidential advisor and joins the chorus of those like John McCain singing "Bomb, bomb, 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 Iran." That seems to be the only solution to anything, is more wars. Not just foreign wars, not just wars in the Middle East, not just picking a fight with the Russians, but also picking a fight with the American people here domestically. And that's what we see in the SOCOM Jade Helm 15. And we have a report later in the broadcast, an update on that from Joe Biggs. But look at the fact that when they contacted him from SOCOM, one of his friends told him, don't worry, it's just a PSYOP operation. Let me tell you, when you start a PSYOP operation against a group, that is a form of warfare. It's information war. It's a prelude to a real war. We need to understand, just as Putin understood, we need to understand that when they start preparing for war against you, when they start arming, when they start making maneuvers, when they start training to fight you, they really mean it. You remember that when he was asked that question, do you really think that these preparations are targeted towards you? Remember, he just laughed for several seconds at the reporter for asking such a silly question. We should laugh when the government, our government, says that these things are not aimed at us. Of course they are. That's why we have the 1033 program. They want to forward place these this military equipment like MRAPs in the hands of law enforcement, have them maintain them at the expense of the local governments, so they'll be in place when they get ready to use them under martial law. That's why they buy the ammunition. That's why they have the training facilities at AP Hill, at Fort Camp Lejeune, training against the American people. And now they're taking it to the next step because they can only do so much training in those facilities that are modeled after American cities. They want to get out into the open so they can actually see what they're going to run into logistically. That's what this is about. And it is also the PSYOP war. Look at this article. Special Ops targets social media. They admit that they're in a PSYOP war. They say U.S. Special Operations are adding a new focus to their portfolio of activities: social media and other unconventional information warfare threats. And of course, that was what was in Jade Helm. They talked about unconventional warfare. They also mean by that asymmetric warfare. Warfare against a lightly armed community that you are heavily armed. So it's asymmetric in that sense, but it's also unconventional in the fact that there's PSYOP operations involved this, and they're also going to be using social media. Not that they haven't already. Of course, they've been doing this for a long time. They're just now admitting it. This is what they say. Social media is another component of unconventional strategies and the security environment in general that is playing a central role in recruiting individuals to causes. And that is the express purpose, they say, of this operation that they're getting ready to do. They're trying to figure out how they can recruit people. They also want us to get accustomed to seeing the military in a large presence in our area. But they also want to establish contact with local governments, determine who they can trust and who is going to be a problem. We want to know that too. We're going to be talking to those people that they're going to be holding these operations with as well. We want to know why they would invite them, if in fact they are going to invite them. And make no mistake, this is a multi-pronged attack. Look at this article up on Infowars.com. HBO documentary hypes the militia threat. Again, coming out and looking at people who are training with firearms, people who have a militia, saying they're the cause to be concerned and we need to be protected against that. That's why we have all of these militarized operations coming in. And understand too, this is not about training for a foreign war. They don't need to work with the Iranian police when they invade Iran and put boots on the ground. This is for domestic use when they train with the police. And of course, they want to know everything we're doing. That's another part of it. That's how they measure to see if their PSYOP is successful, is to monitor all of our communications. And along those lines, we see again, as we mentioned earlier this week, CISPA is back. This time they're calling it CISA. They dropped the P, even though the protection for the corporations that are going to give up your private data is still very much a part of it. There's no protection for your privacy, however. On Infowars.com, we point out Senate Intelligence Committee advances surveillance bill in secret session, and the EFF, which this is a op-ed piece from them, says this fatally flawed bill must be stopped. They say the newest version of CISPA is the worst one yet. They say cybersecurity bills aim to facilitate information sharing between companies and the government. But their broad immunity clauses for companies, their vague definitions, and aggressive spying powers make them secret surveillance bills. CISA marks the 5th time in as many years that Congress has tried to pass cybersecurity legislation. Join us now in killing this bill. Absolutely, we need to speak up. We need to speak against this. We need to get this voted down as we have in the past. And they go on to say that members of Congress, like Senators Dianne Feinstein and Richard Burr, continue to introduce bills that would destroy privacy protections and grant new spying powers to companies. And in this article, you can go back. It's a very good article. I suggest you read it. They talk about the different aspects of it. Of course, they're sharing information with the NSA. There's also the overbroad use of information. They point out that once this information, once your private information is turned over to the government, they can use it however they wish. They can pass it on to any government agency that they wish. And of course, they also point out that there's near blanket immunity for the corporations that turn over your information. They take the idea that any information that they collect as they're doing business with you is as much their information as it is yours. So they're entitled to turn it over to the government. That's the approach they would take, and they would shut you down from coming after them with any civil or criminal actions. And if you think that's not really a big deal, look at how pervasive this is. Google is bragging about a new system of facial recognition that is the best ever. They say last week a trio of Google researchers published a paper on a new artificial intelligence system dubbed FaceNet. That sounds pretty ominous, doesn't it? They say that it achieved 100% accuracy when they looked at a database of 13,000 faces. When they gave it a 260 million face database to look at, FaceNet performed better than 86% accuracy. In other words, they can take one picture and identify you out of essentially the population, nearly the population of the United States. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Now, of course, they're not alone. Facebook, they say, has deep face. And they have algorithms that picture, even when they're not labeled, they'll be able to go in and find your picture and match that up and tag it for you on Facebook. But that, of course, isn't where they really want to go with this. They point out, of course, that Google and Facebook are not the only ones doing it. Microsoft, Baidu, Yahoo are also doing it. But they say, look at the future. And, of course, this article that's coming from Fortune magazine. Now, of course, the writer for Fortune magazine really, I think, takes a very Pollyanna approach to this technology. It's not only gee whiz, he understands where this is going, but he totally doesn't see the problems with it. He says that's not all that's going to happen, he says. As consumer robots, driverless cars, and smart homes become real, deep learning will be there too, providing the eyes, the ears, and some of the brains for our new toys. Something tells me that DARPA is looking at Google's FaceNet and getting pretty excited too. Wow, isn't that exciting? Isn't technology great when it's abused and turned into the most radical surveillance state the world has ever seen? As William Binney said, not even George Orwell could have anticipated what we're in for. But they think it's a great deal. It's going to make the stock prices go up.
The knowledge of the ancients, tried and true, trusted herbs and extracts fused with the latest nutraceutical science. Introducing the all-new Ancient Defense Herbal Immunity Blend, crafted with over 14 key ancient herbs and extracts to supercharge and prepare your body for what experts admit is the most dangerous season of the year. We have rejected hundreds of other formulations in our quest to bring you what is simply the most powerful and comprehensive proprietary formula that we have ever created in the realm of herbal immunity. For the last 2 years, our team has been working with top doctors, nutritionists, and chemists to develop the ultimate nutraceutical formulation. Experience the benefits of combining over 14 ancient herbs and extracts with exciting new advances in nutraceutical science. For a limited time, get 25% off on this introductory offer. Visit ancientdefense.com or call 888-253-3139. ancientdefense.com.
That the U.S. military accidentally, likely, shot down an Iranian commercial jet plane. Now, if that had happened the other way around, we would have never accepted the explanation that that was done accidentally. We have looked for every kind of provocation we can find in order to get at Iran's oil, to control it. We have established dictators, we've established a ruthless terrorist regime, and looks like we're going to try to do that again. They go on to point out that Iran doesn't have a realistic option. He said in the op-ed piece on the Washington Post, what if force is the only way to block Iran from gaining nuclear weapons? That, in fact, is probably the reality. Then he goes on to say, does this mean that our only option is war? He says, yes. Then he goes on to say, but we can strike as often as necessary. You know, we have struck Iran quite a bit The American public doesn't really realize that. Our memory of Iran really extends back to the takeover of the U.S. Embassy. We don't really remember that our government overthrew their democratically elected government. Our CIA did it. And then our CIA trained the Savak. After they put in the Shah, they used the Savak to torture any opposition to the Shah. That's the kind of government that we gave Iran, that they suffered under for decades before they overthrew that government and then occupied the American embassy. We only remember their occupation of the American embassy. We also don't remember Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight, and it's Friday, March 20th, 2015. Now, in response to an op-ed piece that appeared in the Washington Post this last Sunday, we have an article up on Infowars.com from Consortium News. A neocon admits the plan to bomb Iran. Yes, Joshua Moravchik wrote on the Washington Post, he said, the title initially on the print version was, "War is the only way to stop Iran." They toned that down a little bit on the online version. They said, "War with Iran is probably our best option." But this is what he said. He agrees with Netanyahu's hysterical view of Iran, but he recognizes that killing international negotiations on limiting Iran's nuclear program would leave only one